KZN's exclusive Muslim radio station, Radio Al Ansar.
The Noori Siddiqui Show. Reflections to ponder, to think and to reason. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. On this very special morning of the funeral service of Madiba. I've just come from watching the tribute by the various presidents of Tanzania and Malawi, as well as President Zuma, and to look at all the dignitaries. And what I'd like to do today is to cover a topic called letting go of the past and taking the wisdom, and for this program to be a special tribute to Madiba on this day in which he finally is laid to rest. My very special guest today is Safeeyah Moosa, and it's a great honor for me to be on air with Safeeyah. Assalamu alaikum and welcome to the program, Safeeyah.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and thank you very much for inviting me.
Pleasure. It's an absolute pleasure, Safeeyah. And tell us, with regard to letting go of the past and taking the wisdom, what is it you'd like to share with us today?
There's so many aspects to this. I think every one of us, every human being, we're all aware of the benefits of doing that, and how it elevates us to another level as human beings and as spiritual beings, to be able to let go of the past, because a lot of it is just baggage that weighs us down. So what we do by not letting go is we basically get into our own way. We're stepping on our own toes. I'm not saying that we should ignore injustices that have happened and pretend that everything is fine when it's not. But being able to let go is a higher order thinking of our spiritual and human selves, and it's a challenge to do it, and yet it has such rewards. You know, if we look at the Quran and the ethos of the Quran, what I have gleaned in the Quran is the Quran actually sort of covers 3 levels of human conduct, and each one is acceptable and legitimate in that the Quran says this is permissible, but they're different. There's different degrees of how we can present ourselves in life. Now, one of them is retribution, which is an eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, which is within the laws of Islam, where Allah limited the way we reacted to injustices or things done to us, and we had to keep within the limits, but it's permissible. Now, where the next level comes in is the forgiveness. That's where you're letting go, and that level of where Allah mentions that that you're allowed the retribution, but those who are raised in Allah's eyes, or those who forgive, and there is a reward for you in forgiveness. There's often repeated verses in the Quran that make reference to us getting benefit out of forgiveness and being raised in stature because of that ability to genuinely, sincerely forgive. And, in healing therapies, which I know you're familiar with and I do as well,
yes,
it's when people reach that point of forgiveness that the most remarkable, miraculous things happen. They see life differently. They notice more happy things. And I've had situations where people's illnesses, fatal illnesses like cancer, tumors, and other serious, conditions, have actually regressed when a person has managed to let go and forgive, because the body becomes at its peak as well in that. So these are the type of, experiences you can get out of letting go of the past, where there's so much benefit. I think the world views South Africa as a miracle country, that with all the ups and downs and everything that's going right and wrong, it really has stood out as a miracle situation. And I think it was because of Madiba's example of just saying, let go of the past. So I know he was reading a lot of material when he was in prison, and I'm quite certain that he was very influenced by the conduct of Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, because I remember the time when he was released from prison. And I remember the image of him and Winnie Mandela, waving to the crowds, and how he was, there were talks about him saying, we will forgive and we're going to reconcile and we're going to find a way to make this country happen in a different way. It occurred to me at that time. I remember while I was watching this is years ago in the early 90s, and I remember saying to my husband at that time, do you know that I'm sure he knew of the story of Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, because he's kind of copying the same thing. When Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam returned from his hijrah to Medina, he came back into Makkah. he did the same thing. He said, this is how we're going to be. We're going to reconcile. We're going to forgive. And we're not going to loot these people. Nobody will be harmed. And one of the people who was an enemy of Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam at that time was Abu Sufyan, his own uncle. He made him the safe house. He walked past his home saying, this will be the safe house. That was the kind of magnanimous gestures that Madiba sort of approached the new South Africa with. And it so rings with and resonates with, the type of things that we're taught as Muslims in the Quran and by the example of Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam.
Wonderful. Thank you for that, Safeeyah. Just in reflection of what you've said now, when it comes to retribution and looking at the different aspects of injustice, it is only when we are able to see things from a point of view that we strive for justice, not for revenge, not to be right, not to be in a power struggle, but simply to stand in our power. So ultimately, we are never powerless. It's just that we don't stand in our power and own it. And it's in our plight for justice that we stand in our power. So what we saw Madiba do is to stand in his power with his belief, with what he stood for, with the people that he stood for, and was prepared to die for that. So he stood for justice, and I think that's the example that he actually set the world, that there is...
I think you're so correct in bringing up the justice thing, because if you'll recall that in the Quran, Allah says all that was created in the heavens and the earth were not created for sport, but it was created for just ends.
Yes.
So justice is a very pivotal anchor for Islam. And you're right about standing up for justice. And remember, this is also a personal view, our power, when you say you stand in your own power, our power, when we stand in our own power, is actually when we're in sajda, when we are our noses to the ground. When we've completely submitted, there's a higher order that takes over. You are inspired by maybe more just thoughts, more correct behaviors, less revengeful, like you said. And so standing in your power requires being humble, putting aside personal views and judgments of people and saying, if I was that person and everything that happened in their life happened to me, if I had every experience, every nanosecond of experience that they went through, is it not possible I would have been exactly the way they were, even if they were unjust to me? I could have been doing the same injustice because of the way my life had shaped my behavior and influenced the way I conducted myself.
Yes.
If that's the case, then we have no judgments to pass. You know, when I mentioned the retribution and the forgiveness in the Quran, but I said there were 3 levels of conduct. The third one is then benevolence, because once you reach the place of forgiveness, one of the higher levels we can reach in our human conduct is benevolence, where you return a bad deed with a good deed with wisdom, so you influence the people around you, especially the people who you believe may be committing injustices, so that they are influenced to change for the better. So they also get influenced by the conduct of Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, because really we're just trying to walk the path with his perfect example.
Yes.
Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam was the ultimate role model, and he was a hugely benevolent person.
Yes,
and he also
absolutely.
had emotions, he had sadness, he probably had anger and whatever it is that he felt. But it's not that we can't have these feelings or we're supposed to suppress them, because remember, we are hardwired by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and he has created us to feel all these things. Our rise to our best self comes from being able to harbor all these feelings and yet conduct ourselves in the highest and best way possible.